Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where are you. Thank you so much for joining us in this monthly tourism management webinar. Today, we're going to continue our April discussion on the role of theory, and we're going to talk about an important topic: what constitutes theoretical contributions. Based on the number of attendees in this webinar, I can tell this is a very important topic close to everybody's heart. Without further ado, I'm going to introduce our two panelists, both of them distinguished scholars, very well known around the world. The first one that I would like to introduce to present is Professor Noel Scott. Noel Scott is adjunct professor of tourism management in the Elias Cohen University and a visiting professor at Maharan University, Indonesia, and Taylor's University, Malaysia. He has worked as a tourism consultant and academic researcher for 30 years. Noel, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thanks, Robert. So I'm going to talk for about 10 minutes or so. Please give me the signal, if I talk too long, because I can sort of talk underwater. I'll share my screen. Can you see that? Okay, so the topic we're going to talk about today, Robin and I, is about arguably the central part of being an academic, and that is making a contribution to knowledge. So, and that's contribution is a sort of a bit of a nebulous term, but hopefully I'll be able to try and make it a little bit more concrete for you today. But I'm going to do that by giving you a little bit of a background first, because as academics, we're dealing with phenomena, and we could do that from many different perspectives. I tend to take a psychological view, but there's sociology, economics, management, and each one of those disciplines looks at a particular problem, that's the elephant, in a different way. So every discipline, that is the psychology or sociology, has its own way of thinking about looking at an elephant or looking at the problem. It has paradigmatic assumptions that it makes. It has certain theories and concepts and relationships which are accepted ways of studying a problem. I don't ever try and study things from an economic perspective, but I'm sure many people do. Sociology and psychology are related, but one's about fundamentally studying groups, another one is studying individuals. So if you try and study a phenomena from a psychological perspective, you can then sort of ignore lots of other research which might be from sociology or economics. You don't have to discuss that. So, and also different disciplines study different things. If you're studying psychology, you're fundamentally thinking about how the brain works, or alternatively, how we behave, which seems strange as a way to study psychology, but many people do it. And then within that particular field, discipline, there are streams of literature. That is, groups of people around the world who have studied particular phenomena from a disciplinary perspective, but in a particular way. Maybe they're focused on some particular theory. So the first thing you've got to do if you want to make a contribution is to know what you're contributing to. You don't start off by saying, hey, listen, lots of people have done this stuff, but there's a gap and no one else has talked about it. You can say that, but it's not helpful because it's ignoring all the work that previous people have done. That's not what an academic does. An academic makes a contribution by analyzing the particular area that they're studying and working out where there's a problem, and then contributing to that. So a contribution is not a generic term. A contribution is related to a particular field, a particular problem that you identify before you start. If you don't identify the potential contribution before you start your research, you could end up anywhere. You may be lucky enough to make a contribution, but probably you're not going to. So thinking about psychology and behavioral psychology, there's a whole series of narrowing down that you can do to relate some particular stream of literature, perhaps future holiday consumption behavior, and by reading about what's been written about future holiday consumption behavior, you will then perhaps identify some anomaly. What's an anomaly? Well, here we go. So this is some way of describing all the research that's been undertaken in behavioral psychology, focusing on using the theory of planned behavior with a particular methodology and various streams of literature. And of course, some of that work was on future behavior, might have been done in marketing, or in others might have been done in tourism and so on. But the point is, by looking at all, and so each individual elephant that I've got there is a problem, is a study that someone's done to look at a particular problem. Now, once you know those things, once you know the full extent of the prior research, you can start to identify problems. You can start to identify anomalies where one researcher found the elephant was in some way and another researcher found some other problem. So out of all these individual studies, you find a couple of problems. Oh, look, Professor Smith found that his elephant was green and Professor Scott found that his elephant was blue. Why is that? Once you identify a problem in the existing literature, an anomaly, then you can start to design a research to answer that and hence to make a contribution. And the thing is, you don't have to worry about if you're going to make a contribution, because right from the start, you know what your contribution is going to be about. It's going to be about an anomaly, this problem that exists in the existing literature between two papers. And if you can somehow do some research that explains why there's a difference in some way, then you've made a contribution for sure. Okay, so a contribution is not something that is unrelated to the prior literature. A contribution, in my opinion, is something that adds to the existing literature by solving some existing problem. Many people don't see it that way. Many people begin a paper by saying, there's been a lot of research on future tourism behavior, but no one has used the theory of blah, blah, blah. So when a person writes a paper like that, what they're effectively saying is, hey, all you people who have studied future tourism behavior, I don't need to read your work, because I'm going to look over here in this new area and stuff you. You have to listen to what I have to say. Not a very good look for a young researcher. So what is a contribution? A contribution concerns the problem that has been previously studied or previously identified. And here's a little tip. Every problem has been previously identified. If in your paper you say, I am the first person to have studied this, what you're really saying is you haven't read the literature yet, okay? And it's about a well-defined and justified academic question. It's not So you might say, I'm going to make a contribution to practice. I'm going to help tourism managers work better. Well, that's fine. That's not an academic contribution. And I'm talking about academic contributions. And it's a contribution if, and only if, you justify at the beginning of the paper why it's important, and then at the end of the paper explain what you found and why in particular it's important and what it means to other people. Okay, so it's justified as a contribution by clearly identifying how it contributes to to the academic literature. And that's another big problem. People say, well, I've made a contribution because, and then they just repeat the results that they've found. Okay, that's what you found. That's not your contribution. Your contribution is these results mean that the theory that so-and-so has written about is wrong or is right or can be enhanced in this way. Okay, so there are a couple of different problems that I can identify with contributions. So the first one is you write a paper, but you don't explain where the theories you're using comes from. You don't discuss the discipline and where this particular theory fits in and who was using it, when was it used, and why is it still relevant? Most people assume that theories remain relevant. Well, they don't. An example is, which I get sick and tired of talking about now, but SOR theory, for example, is patently wrong, as is theory of planned behavior. Anyway, I can go into that. But you've got to be able to understand not just your core theory, but where it comes from and how it's different or how it can be separated out from other theories which might compete with it. So if you don't do that, you're sort of floating. You're saying, oh, well, I'm studying this theory, and you're not telling people that you know enough about it. And then you describe a situation, a current problem, without discussing the previous studies that have been used to study it. It's as if you're saying you're the first person to have studied this problem. And you don't give a good explanation of what the problem that you're studying is. In fact, that's where people typically say, oh, well, I've done all these things and there's a gap in the literature, without really explaining why that gap is important and how it relates to previous research. And then the author concludes without identifying and justifying the contribution to knowledge they have made. As I said, one of the big problems is people will finish a paper by simply explaining that their results again. Okay, here's another problem with contributions. And this is unfortunately quite common these days. An author introduces a new theory without justifying why it's important and needs to be used. So they may say that they're studying, I don't know, destination image, and then they'll say, yeah, but no one has used a theory that was used to study destination image in 1924 in France. And I'm going to use this theory because there's been no research on it. Well, not a good justification for why that theory is important and needs to be used. And additionally, they might use this new theory without explaining how it relates to the current body of knowledge and what people are using. They'll just say, no one's used this, I'm going to use it. And because I'm using a new theory, I must maybe make a contribution. That's not true. You don't know if you've made a contribution because you haven't reviewed the literature to explain how that particular theory relates to how everyone else is doing it. Okay, and this is an example of type 2 theory. You have an existing body of knowledge and you come up with a new way of solving this problem using some new theory which doesn't relate in any way to the prior research. So you may be able to find some interesting results. You may say that you have made a contribution, but you won't be able to justify it because you're talking about two completely unrelated things. So what does an academic do? An academic tries to contribute to solving academic problems that have been found to exist by other people. Okay? An academic contributes to knowledge by building on previous research, not saying, hey guys, all that research exists, but you're all stupid because you're not doing what I'm doing. Now, a professor may try and introduce new theories with a good reason because they've been studying the area for 30 years and maybe they've got an idea of how a new theory can contribute. But for most of the people listening today, early career researchers try not to introduce a new theory unless you perhaps think you're Einstein. And if you think you're Einstein, then that's good. So the whole paper, writing a paper, doing research, revolves around, centers on the contribution. It's the most important thing in a paper. And when you're writing a paper, the research question it identifies what you're going to make a contribution about. It's not a mystery story. You don't find your contribution at the end. You know from your research at the beginning, you've done a good literature review, you've identified some problems, you resolve this issue, that's your proposed contribution. If I do my research, this is what's going to happen. The literature review then justifies the proposed research question is real and important. Okay. Then the results answer the question, and the discussion demonstrates how answering the question provides a contribution that is important in terms of the existing literature, as well as future research. But the future research is a bit of an extra. What you're trying to do is say, my research has addressed this academic issue, it's shown this, and as a result of that, this is the important result that everyone has to think about now, all the people who are working in my area. Just as an example, I'm running out of time, I think. One of my pet hobbies is hobby horses, is to talk about literature reviews. And I just happened to find this one, which is about some memorable tourism experiences. Perhaps you could have a quick look while I'm talking. The thing is, most people think that a literature review is somehow different and doesn't have to make a contribution. That is, if you describe the literature by doing a systematic literature review, then you have made a contribution. So this is an example of, I think, a type 1 problem with a contribution. What it's doing is saying, I haven't identified any problems that I'm going to try and address in my literature review. I'm just going to do some stuff, describe some things, and by describing those things, I have made a contribution. Okay? Now, maybe you will, but certainly in this paper, by identifying 3 research streams, that's a description, and identifying research agendas, which are unrelated to the prior research, is, in my opinion, not making a contribution. But that's again, it's a particular issue related to literature reviews. But my point is, any paper, no matter if it's a literature review, an empirical paper, or a theoretical paper, must identify some anomaly, seek to address it and justify that it's important, produce some results, and then discuss and clearly identify why you have made a contribution. Hopefully that helps. I don't know how long I went for, but I'll stop now. Thanks, guys.
Thank you so much, Professor Scott. I really appreciate multiple points you made, and for example, like when you discuss theoretical contribution, you need to identify the disciplinary roots of the theory. And when you discuss the theoretical contribution, you also have to position it in the existing dialogue and make sure that you make connections to the existing dialogues. Brilliant. We will have more time to discuss them. Our next speaker is Professor Robin Nanku. Dr. Nanku is a professor at the University of Mauritius and holds visiting positions in several universities. He has a PhD from the University of Waterloo, Canada, has published widely in leading tourism and hospitality journals. Robin has been listed as highly cited researcher by Collaborate for 2021, 22, and 23. Thank you so much, Robin. The floor is yours.
All right, guys. So I'll build up on what Noel has already mentioned and also provide new perspective to the elusive concept of theoretical contribution. I think the definition of theoretical contribution is very unsettled in the literature. And I think different fields, different disciplines define the theoretical contribution differently. Now, before moving into the core of the debate, I would like to spend a couple of seconds talking about the institutionalization of the term theory and theoretical contribution. The reason we are having this webinar now is because most journals, and that's not only in the field of tourism and hospitality, in all social science or medical sciences journal, okay, the top journals, they look for every article to make a theoretical contribution to knowledge. And this is expressed in different ways. For example, Annals of Tourism Research focuses on the term theory and the development of theoretical construct. JTR again focuses on the development of theoretical construct, development of theory. Papers published in tourism management should contribute to theoretical and or methodological advancement. So the whole term about theoretical contribution has been institutionalized in academia by universities and by scientific journals. Now, what constitutes theoretical contribution? Now, the first thing I would like to emphasize, and what I usually do as a researcher, and this is, I think, something has worked well for me, and I think I also see that very common in the literature, you need to clearly articulate your theoretical contribution in the introduction. So normally it's advisable, depending on obviously the journal format, etc., that the last paragraph of the introduction articulate the theoretical contribution, okay, which means that what are you contributing to knowledge? Now, obviously, now that we've already mentioned where do you craft or where do you articulate your theoretical contribution, what does theoretical contribution mean? So we'll look at 4 different angles of theoretical contribution. Obviously, there are many more ways what can contribute to theory, but I've looked at the most obvious one, and I think I'm going to focus on the most problematic one in our field. Now, one of the problems the literature, the tourism and hospitality literature has focused on so far, they have focused on theory application. Now, I mentioned the point earlier on that using a certain theory that has not been used previously does not in itself constitute theoretical contribution, right? I would say it's more theoretical application. And now, applying a theory in a new tourism context in itself does not constitute theoretical contribution. You need, as a researcher, to be able to articulate using the broader literature in the field why using this theoretical perspective will add to the body of knowledge, how that theory or that theoretical perspective you are adopting would provide a different view on the phenomenon so far. Now, in here, I would also make a distinction between theory application and theory testing. I think in tourism, we have focused on more theory application rather than the theoretical development. Now, what does theoretical development and the so-called theoretical contribution mean? Theoretical development or theoretical contribution also involve the refinement of existing theories. Now, how do we refine existing theories? If that we need to expose them to rigorous testing. We do that. But what we don't do enough, and this is where also a very important component of theoretical contribution, we need to be able to rule out theories that fail such tests and map out our theoretical progress. I will come back to the point about falsifying theories as a theoretical contribution, right? So the theoretical contribution not only involves theory application. I think theory application involves the testing of hypotheses and variables based on a certain theoretical idea. I think as researchers, we are very good in doing that. Okay, we add mediating variable, moderating variable. You know, we add different IVs and DVs based on a certain theoretical perspective, and then we say this constitutes theoretical contribution. But I'm asking you to go one step beyond. Okay, so theoretical development, and theoretical development is a very important element of theoretical contribution. This makes use of construct and proposition to explain why something is expected to occur. And this is the difference between proposition and hypothesis. Hypothesis or statement explaining what is expected to occur. And we do that very well in tourism research. And I think this is not always a good thing because we keep on testing new theories. Okay, we do not engage in that theory development well. So theory development involves using construct and proposition to explain why something is expected to occur. So just to conclude in here, guys, theoretical contribution also involves theory development, not only theory application. Theory application is mere saying, applying an existing theory in a new context. And I think with time, it's getting tougher and tougher to publish these types of articles in the top journals. Now, I come back to the point. Pursuing failure also constitutes theoretical contribution. And I don't think as a discipline, we do that really well. Or I think I've seen that with researchers, with doctoral students, okay? They are very reluctant to deal with what we famously call the null finding. Remember, guys, theoretical contribution also involves understanding where a theory has failed. Now, philosophically, if you remember Karl Popper, okay, Karl Popper introduced the idea of falsification, okay, using the examples of the anecdotal evidence that all swans are white. And he provided a very good example as to how falsifying the idea that all swans are white constitute theoretical contribution. The fact that people have observed black swans has helped us to falsify the notion that all swans are white. So the point I'm trying to make in here, that theoretical contribution also involves showing to readers, showing to the scientific community where a theory does not apply and why does it not apply, okay? And it is important that we open ourselves to research that falsify theories. And that element of falsification, much has been debated about what it means. So in simple terms, it means that you need to be able to articulate your null finding in such a way that it provides a new perspective to the theory. And that new perspective also involves, tell me where the theory does not apply. Because if we are to progress science, guys, we need to be able to falsify theories. So falsifying of theory is a virtue of good science. And I refer, presenters in here and audience to the paper we published in Journal of Travel Research, looking at the relationship between tourism and economic growth. And we found evidence of publication bias, that is then over tendency for researchers to publish findings that support theory, but there's a tendency for researchers to be reluctant to submit findings that reject theory. So pursuing failure is a very important component of theoretical contribution. Now, and this is purely a positivistic approach to this topic. Now, strong inference, because in our field, we engage a lot in theory testing, okay? And I don't think we do that based on the existing good scientific principle. Theory testing also means you need to be able to use different theories in the same research and engage in a process of what's called strong inference to be able to say which set of alternative hypotheses holds and why. So you need to be able to use theories that are comparable, deal with the same construct, time frame, level of abstraction, but they make contradictory prediction. Okay, we need to be able to replace research that tests one theory, and we are very good in doing that as researchers, and replace those types of studies by research that compares alternative theories by pitting competing theories against and hypotheses against one another, guys. But the goal in here is that that element of theoretical contribution would involve eliminating marginal and weak theoretical candidate. For example, now if I ask you a question, what's the best theories that explains travel behavior? We don't know what's the best theory that explains travel behavior. We don't know what's the best theoretical perspective that explains a certain tourism phenomenon, because we have been applying theories and theories over theories to study the same phenomenon again and again without coming to a conclusion, okay, these theories need to be ruled out, and these theories are most likely to provide the best explanation of that phenomenon. Finally, and this is something that, again, one of the reasons many papers get rejected is because they focus a lot on that context. So, for example, you would say, you know what, the research has been carried out over the world, but it has not been carried out in Mauritius. That in itself does not constitute theoretical contribution. What you need to engage in, so what constitutes theoretical contribution is how does the empirical context that you are using, how data from that context, observation from that context would provide a new perspective to that theory. Do not simply articulate or mention, nothing has been done in my context, so that constitutes theoretical contribution. Your paper will get rejected, it gets rejection at that very moment, okay? So you need to be able to understand how does the tourism context you are investigating shape the boundaries and assumption of the theory. We don't do that enough in tourism research. We tend to neglect context when in fact there are many rich issues in the context that can advance the boundaries of the theory. But also advancing the boundaries of the theory also means using the context to falsify a certain theoretical perspective that has so far been taken for granted in the literature. So remember, guys, theories are enriched by the context in which they are studied, and it's your job to articulate that context and how they constitute, how they add up to the theoretical body of knowledge in the introduction of the article. To conclude the next 30 seconds, I would also like to make a distinction between theoretical contribution and theoretical implication. The theoretical contribution is normally articulated in the introductory chapter or the introductory section of your manuscript, and the concluding section, or probably the discussion section, is the theoretical implication. The theoretical implication is what do we learn theoretically from your research? What should researchers do differently? Should we keep on using that theory? Is it time to put that theory to bed and consider alternative theories? And I'm not too sure many articles make that distinction between theoretical contribution and theoretical implication, although they are very much linked. Thank you, Robert. We'll be happy to answer questions now.
Thank you so much, Professor Nanku. This is fascinating. I really like that you brought up the very important issue of falsifiable, that research needs to be falsifiable, and you make important distinction between theory application and the theory development. I think that's also a very relevant issue for our field. I did actually prepare a number of questions as a moderator, but I think it's not necessary because we have seen lots of questions being asked and shared in the chat room. So let me start at one from the first one. When we write empirical articles, we need to deduce or infer theories based on a certain theory. Is there any rule in the process of theoretical deduction or inference? How should we write it? Finally, we propose hypotheses and research models. Professor Scott and Professor Nanku, whoever wants to answer.
I can answer the question. I can answer the question. Now, obviously, I'm assuming you are following a very positivistic approach to your question, because you talk about theory deduction. So philosophically, quantitative research is it's a deductive approach to research. You deduce from a certain theory. Now, what does it mean? It means that part of your literature review should be able to identify a certain theoretical perspective that you're going to use. Okay, to me, once you've identified that theoretical perspective then disintegrates itself into variables. Okay, and those variables should be clearly emanating from that theory. And from the variables, then you propose your relationship. One of the fundamental, I would say, fatal errors researchers make, they propose a theory very loosely, just to satisfy, reviewers or editors' requirement that the article is theoretically grounded. I talk about that, in a paper we published in a couple of years ago about the lip service used to the term theory. So what they do, they propose the term theory, and then you realize the hypotheses have got nothing to do with the theory, or the discussion is not tied back to the theory. So I think your theory, your variables, your hypothesis, together, this is what you do in your theoretical foundation section of your research. And of course, I'm talking about a positivistic approach to research. It should be clear that when you are saying X influences Y, that comes from a certain theoretical perspective. The relationship itself between X and Y, that in itself is not the theory. The theory is the logical explanation that connects the two variables together. And it's your job to articulate that in the literature review chapter or section of your manuscript. Obviously, there's more we can talk about it, but obviously there's let's leave time for the questions. But I hope this answers the question. Thank you, Professor Scott. Do you have something to add? Because I see you're also answering questions in the chat.
Yeah. You need to identify a theory, and then to somehow connect it to the phenomena that you're studying. So you just don't pick any theory. You say, when people have been studying the phenomena of destination image, they have been using this theory and this theory and this theory. Okay. And so that gives you a starting point for the type of theories, or perhaps a particular theory that you're going to use. Then, if you want a replication strategy, you will simply apply that theory to the phenomena based on the fact that you can justify that theory applies, and show some results and perhaps replicate what you're doing. But you need some justification. I mean, you need some justification for why you picked the theory and why you're going to spend a month of your life or more doing this research and be able to show that it's useful for someone. So it's better to, even if you want to do a replication study, there's got to be some reason for it. You might be replicating a particular theory in a boundary condition where it hasn't been tested, or you might be replicating it with a different type of sample. So those are your justifications for replication. If you're picking a theory and you want to apply it to a phenomena, but you want to examine some problem with the theory, then you go back to what I was talking about. You've got to identify the theory, see where there's been some problem in the past, and then determine how you're going to test that problem in the situation where you're looking at this particular phenomena. Hope that helps. I'm not sure if it does.
So the next question actually has been discussed a little bit on the chat, and the first part of the question is, does bringing gaps in literature or bringing needs for research suggested by previous scholars and working on those lines to fill the knowledge gap count as a theoretical contribution? Or it has to do with a specific theory or narrow theory rather than broader literature theme or topic? And on top of that, there's also this follow-up question, like, so if a previously prominent scholar writes need for a research on a certain topic, is it justified or not? Professor Nanku and Professor Scott?
I mean, simply suggesting that there's a need for research on this topic does not in itself constitute theoretical contribution. You know, and I think the theoretical contribution for every individual is unique. You need to be, okay, you need to say like, okay, we need to know more about the phenomenon. We need to research the phenomenon, and it's clear we need to research that particular phenomenon. But the question is, how do you research it? What perspective are you adding to the literature? So again, that theoretical perspective becomes useful. You know, for example, now, you know, the hot topic is artificial intelligence. So people are saying we need more research on artificial intelligence. So that statement in itself does not constitute theoretical contribution. It constitutes the broader justification for the research question. But then within that topic, you can have several research questions that would require a different theoretical assumption, different theoretical contribution. Okay, so the answer, no, simply saying that there's a need for more research on this topic does not in itself constitute theoretical contribution.
Well, the short answer is if Robin says that it probably is important. For everyone else, I think you should be suspicious. So here's a tip, guys. Here's a secret tip. Not everything you read in a tourism journal is correct. Huh? Maybe it's 70%, maybe it's 60%. But the problem is, the reason you're getting the big money, the reason why you're doing your PhD is to be able to work out the 50% that's right and to contribute to it. So sure, an easy way for a person who doesn't want to read the existing literature and question and critically examine the existing literature is to say, well, there's a gap and someone's examined it. But here's the other problem. A gap, as Robin's saying, is not, a gap is like saying, hey, guys, we haven't done any research here. Now, there can be a number of reasons why people haven't done research in a particular area. It may be foolish. It may be stupid. It may be, you know, like as I've sometimes mentioned to PhD students, there's no research on green-headed people sitting on top of mountains, right? That's a gap. But it's not necessarily a justifiably important gap related to a particular theory. So there's two issues. Just because it's a gap doesn't mean it's important. And just because a professor says it's important, well, if a professor says it, well, maybe you're more likely to believe it. But if an early career researcher from Lapland, sorry if anyone's from Lapland, says something, well, perhaps you may be a little bit critical, okay? So just because someone said it is no excuse for you accepting it.
Very, very important. Like we always have to practice our critical thinking skills. The next questions, I apologize, I probably cannot cover all questions, but I'm just gonna select some of the questions that are probably relevant to most of us. So the next question is that what are the fundamental elements to approach theories for a particular phenomenon? What are the criteria for strong justifications in terms of theory choices?
Right. All right. Okay. Now, this question is very relevant to tourism because tourism is not a discipline in itself, you know. So what researchers have done, and I think Noel articulated that in his presentation at the very beginning, that tourism research is built up in economics, sociology, marketing, psychology, neurology, and even biology science. So I think if you want to make a contribution to tourism research, you cannot narrow your reading to tourism articles. You need to, obviously, tourism articles constitute your core readings, okay? But that's very secondary. So the concepts you are most likely to investigate in tourism research are most likely to emanate from other disciplines. So I think to be able to understand that theoretical contribution or what constitutes theoretical contribution, you need to go and read on those concepts, seminal papers on those concepts. Look what other fields have done. Okay, what theoretical perspective have they utilized? So you need to be a domain expert there. And then obviously, once you understand what has been done on the concept in other disciplines, what has been done on the concept in your discipline, you will obviously be able to understand the gap. And I always say to my PhD student, you need to understand the forest, not the individual trees, right? Of course, the forest is made up of the individual trees, but you need to understand how the knowledge base looks like. I use the term codification of knowledge. You need to be able to break down knowledge in a manageable form for you to be able to identify the gap and the theoretical perspective you want to utilize. So focus on the depth and the breadth of your reading. Narrow reading will not work. Read broader outside your discipline.
Thanks from me. There's two parts to this question. What are the fundamental elements to approach theories? Well, I call them concepts, and so when you're studying a particular phenomena, you have to relate that phenomena to a core concept. If you're studying destination management, you might be thinking about the concept of trust. Once you identify the concept of trust, then you're in a position to trace that concept back, as Robin said, to the original discipline or to related disciplines to see how people have studied trust in the broader sense. In terms of criteria for strong justification of theory, or just generally picking a theory, you have to be able to relate the theoretical relationships to the concept, to the phenomena. That's what I was talking about when I was talking about the disciplines and the elephant. Every discipline, psychology, looks for theories related to particular parts of the phenomenon, economics versus psychology. So there's no justification for choosing physics or sociology or psychology over economics. Ultimately, that justification comes down to your area of interest, okay? Because you could be an economist or you could be a sociologist. So the choice of theoretical discipline, and to some extent the particular theories you use, are up to you. But once you narrow it down to a fairly discrete body of knowledge, then you're looking for what I would call an anomaly, some problem in the existing literature related to that theory and related to the phenomena that you're going to study. And if you can find that anomaly within a theoretical framework, you have a great justification for doing your research, and you'll get it published.
Great. The next question is probably not particularly clear. Let's try our best to understand it. If we refine a conceptual framework based on previous model, how and what is the theoretical contribution? So you based on the theoretical model, but you just make some kind of adjustment. What is the theoretical implication, and can you explain how we bring these two aspects into one paper?
Right. Okay. First question is, what a theoretical framework? There's a big confusion in the literature, and this confusion, emanates, is relevant to all disciplines, from nursing to science to marketing to even social sciences in general. So what is the theoretical framework? Are you saying the theoretical framework is the theory that you use, or the theoretical framework is a theoretical model that you've built on a certain theory? Now, that refinement of, let's say the theoretical framework is the theory that you want to refine. And this is why I've mentioned at the very beginning of my presentation, theoretical contribution does not only constitute theory application, which we have been doing. It constitutes the refinement of existing theories. Okay, so yes, refining existing theories is a valuable component of theoretical contribution. But I think the challenge is, how do you engage in that refinement of existing theories? Simply collecting data and testing the theory, or adding one or two variable, mediating, moderating variable, does not constitute refinement. So it comes back to that element of strong inference that I've mentioned. Strong inference is one of the ways researchers are suggesting to be able to bring together in one paper competing theories, alternative and competing sets of hypotheses, and then to accept the theories that resist falsification. Okay, so it's not simply us saying refining existing theory. The question is, how do you refine that theoretical framework? Simply adding variable does not constitute refinement and does not constitute theoretical contribution.
Yes, Robin, I agree. I think the question starts in the wrong place. So if you've completed some research using a conceptual framework and somehow refined it without having any idea of the type of theoretical contribution you're going to make, then you miss the point. You need to begin with a conceptual framework and an intended theoretical contribution. Once you do that, then you've answered your question, because you'll either support that the theoretical contribution you intended to make is correct, or you will find that it's not. But either of those outcomes will allow you to write a paper. So the point is, you're writing as if you didn't have an idea of the outcome of your paper when you did the research. And that's the problem. If you have an idea of the outcome of your paper, that is the proposed conceptual framework, theoretical framework, or the revision of the framework, before you start, all your problems go away and you'll get a paper published.
Thank you. I'm facing this pleasant but also cruel dilemma of there's so many questions there. But let me just probably just this for the last question. I think it's a question that we got a lot. For a quantitative study, there are always many hypotheses. For each hypothesis, does it always require a specific theory to support it? When there are several hypotheses, there can be several supporting theories. But do we need to consider the assumption and roots of different theories align or conflict? I want to hear more suggestions from the professors. Very interesting question.
Okay, good, but very valuable question. And I think my simple answer to that, it's not about the number of hypotheses. The question you need to ask yourself as a researcher is together, do those hypotheses tell me a coherent story? You know, that's the question. It's the coherency. I mean, you may have 20 hypotheses. I'm not impressed if all those hypotheses are going into the different direction. So you need to have an integrated theoretical framework. Okay, and that integrated theoretical framework can be based on 2 or 3 different theories, what we call theoretical triangulation. You look at the same phenomenon you want to investigate from different perspectives, right? So once you have that integrated perspective that's telling you probably the same story coherently, then your hypothesis should logically be based on the theories underlying your conceptual model. Right? And yes, it should be that the theories or each of your hypotheses are theoretically grounded. Otherwise, there would be a disjoint between your theoretical perspective you articulate in your literature review and your hypothesis and eventually your discussion. Okay, so that integrated perspective is central. Okay, if you feel that the hypotheses are going into different direction, it might be within the same topic. Then you've got a problem. Your reader would question, where is this actually going? Right? So I think that's my response to this question, Robert. Thanks.
Yeah, and I agree with all of that. The other thing is, just from a practical point of view, if you want to write a good paper, you have to review the relevant literature. So reviewing the relevant literature about a theoretical theory in a reasonably critical manner, that is not just saying so-and-so said this and so-and-so said that, but actually critically or criticizing the theory and showing where there are problems. If you want to do that for one theory, it'll probably take you 1,000 words. Now, if you're writing a paper that's 7,500 words these days, including your references, there, and you've got 3 theories, that means your 3,000 words are going to be in your literature review without your methodology and the results and the discussion and the complexity of trying to tie all these theoretical theories together. Don't do it. Make it easy for yourself. Pick one theory and examine it in detail. And maybe when you're a professor, Mr. KK, Professor KK, you can do 10, but I think it's a mistake. It's common these days that everyone wants to have 17 theories. I think pick one is better.
Well, thank you so much. I know there are still many questions, but to respect everybody's time, we have to stop here. This whole discussion actually reminds me of the renowned theory of relativity, that when you are spending time in a very interesting topic, you find that, wow, time really flies, right? So thank you so much for Professor Scott and Professor Nanku for your wonderful presentations, very clear and very relevant to the tourism scholarship.